A little bird tells me you like gaming PCs. A little bird tells me you like a bit of the old RGB. Well, listen up, sunshine. You're in the right place because you're here with me. So stay with me. We're going to be going through the parts we're putting together into this beautiful RGB PC build today here on the channel. It's what we do. We put together lovely aesthetic builds, bit of inspiration for you to put together your own, and we often focus on a particular component. And today we are focusing on the EZDIY Moonlight RGB fans that really do give it that elevation into a higher class of RGB, something a little bit more interesting than a standard RGB fan, and actually not coming in too expensive, but also not too cheap either. So we're going to go through obviously the parts we're going to use, we're going to be putting it together in a build, we're going to be testing out in games as well, and we're going to have a lovely laugh. That's what we like to do here on the channel, so stick with me. So it'd be rude not to thank you for your time, so thank you very much for stopping by, and I must apologise for the clothing that I am wearing today. I don't usually wear a vest, it is considered low class, but this is the UK, it is summertime. As soon as that temperature dial hits 16 degrees Celsius, everybody's whipping all their kit off. We're going from pasty white all the way to a pink gammon steak. It's absolutely boiling, and I cannot wear any more clothing than I currently am, so you're going to have to deal with it. But you don't care about that, you care about this gaming PC. So let's talk about the parts that we used in this build today. And like most gaming builds, the centerpiece is the video card, and we have the RTX 3070 Ti, but this is the Gigabyte Aorus Master version, so this is probably the best 3070 Ti. Maybe the Supreme X is also up there as well, ASUS Strix, these kind of things. It's all in that same tier, right? Very high end. This one in particular has got a massive heatsink. It's absolutely huge heatsink on it. It's so big, in fact, that we had to add a freestanding video card brace to keep it from sagging. On the right-hand side of the card as well, you've got that nice little LCD screen as well, so you can put things like the temperature on it, or a GIF or something like that, if that's what you're into. It's obnoxiously large, but it's going to work really nicely in this sort of blacked-out RGB theme that we're going for. And obviously, along those lines, we're going to be talking about the case. So we've got the Corsair 4000D Airflow in black. That's a nice black case, smoky side panel, good airflow going through it. Of course, the clue is in the name. Now, almost equally important as the graphics card for your gaming performance is your processor. So for this one, we actually chose the i5-12400F, and that might raise a few eyebrows because i5-1200F is a locked SKU, so you're not going to get any overclocking out of it. It's not one of these super high-end CPUs, which you might want to pair with a 3070 Ti. You might think, oh, I want a slightly higher-end CPU, but it all depends on your customer, basically. Who's going to be using this and what are they going to be using it for? So, for instance, if you're going to be playing Call of Duty, Apex Legends, these kind of titles that are really heavy on the CPU, that you need a lot of CPU speed, particularly in terms of the clock speed needs to be nice and high. Perhaps the 12400F might let you down a bit, where you might want something like a 12600K, 12700K, thinking about a slightly higher end CPU in those cases. But for somebody that wants to play single player games, or if they want to play at 4K resolution or at 1440p with all the settings maxed out, oftentimes the 12400F is absolutely fine, and you're still going to be video card limited in most of your games anyway. So the 12400F does make sense. Just make sure it's for the like person. If you're somebody that wants to max those frame rates in esports titles, then you want to put a bit more money into your CPU. But for this, it's absolutely fine. One of the other benefits of having a locked CPU like this is they tend to run really cool as well. And we're slapping this liquid cooler on top of it as well, which is going to keep those temperatures hopefully nice and low. It's the IDCOOLING Auraflow 240mm liquid cooler. It's a 4-pin RGB, so it's not ARGB. But that's actually absolutely fine because we're going to be replacing all the fans in the case anyway. The thing I like about the ID-Cooling is they're pretty cheap. They're actually quite reliable. I haven't had a single one break yet. They cool nicely, and they're really nice to mount, and they come with the right mounting gear to actually work with 12th gen Intel as well, which still a lot of companies are buying their liquid coolers and they're not coming with the right kit, which is pretty frustrating. So for the motherboard, we've got the ASUS TUF B660 Plus Wi-Fi. I do like boards that have got Wi-Fi built in, because it's always nice as a backup. You should be using wired when you can, but having that Wi-Fi as a backup is great. I have had Ethernet cables that break, even the posh ones. Sometimes you slam a door on it or you step on it and it cracks it. These kind of things, it's nice to have the Wi-Fi, and of course it gives you the Bluetooth connectivity as well. The TUF B660 Plus not one of the best boards, but also not one of the worst. And remember, we're working with a locked CPU here, so this actually is a perfect pairing as far as I'm concerned. You can go for your fancy boards, but you're not really going to get much more out of a 12400F, so I would say save your money in this regard. Memory-wise, we've got 32 gigabytes, that's 2 lots of 16, DDR4, 3600 speed, Patriot Viper. 32 gigs is really nice at the moment for gaming, and it's not that much more expensive when you're on DDR4. So I would actually suggest, guys, get that 32 gigabytes in whilst you still can, because obviously we're transitioning to DDR5. It's, you know, we're talking years here, but the DDR4 will slowly start to fade out, and then you'll be left wondering, oh, maybe if I should have just got that 32 gig in the first place. So it's a good choice to get this one here. Storage, you've got 1 terabyte SN550 from WD. It's one of the classics here on the channel. Really nice, pretty speedy, great for gaming. If you're a big productivity buff, then you probably want a PCIe 4 SSD, something like the SN850. But for gaming, that kind of thing just isn't required. We've got our power supplies on a really good deal. We bought a bunch of these 850 watt, 80 plus gold Thermaltake GFs. I've had a look around. Actually pretty highly rated. There's some problems reported with them, but that is on a particular voltage. So I think in the USA your plugs run on 130 volts, something like that, and I think in the UK we run on 230 volts. When you're running this power supply on our electricity grid here in the UK, works perfectly. When you're running it on the US grid, sometimes you get problems. So that's where the confusion around these power supplies is. They're actually fantastic for EU users. Perhaps want to avoid this if you're a US user. But 850 watts giving us plenty of headroom here. 750 watts would be what is recommended for this kind of system. 850 gives us a bit of breathing room, and in addition it means that fan's not going to run as fast, keeps your system nice and cool and quiet. Now if you want to make your build aesthetic, you want to make it visually pleasing, there is pretty much no negotiation here. You have to use custom cabling. We're using custom extensions today. Oftentimes we'll use shack mods. Unfortunately, this build was time sensitive. I needed to get something that I could get Amazon Prime the next day. So we use these FormulaMod red, grey and black custom cables. Actually, turns out they look pretty nice. When I opened the box, I was pleasantly surprised by how they looked. I still will be using shack mods for pretty much everything else, but you know, it's nice to know there's an option there, Prime next day, if I do need some cable extensions. These are a decent quality pair as well. Now on to sort of the star of the show, if you like, what we're talking about today, these EZDIY Moonlight fans, PWM version. So there's a few different versions of these. You definitely want to get the ones with a standard PWM connector and the standard ARGB connector as well. There are some out there that use a proprietary connector. You don't want those, you definitely want the one with the standard connectors. So your regular fan speed, your regular 3-pin ARGB, so make sure you're looking out for the right ones. I will put a link in the description where you can get them in the UK. The reason you want the industry standard connectors is that you can then easily move these around into other systems. If you upgrade this system, you know you're using something that is an industry standard, and if one of the components breaks or something, you're not having to go out and find this proprietary connector, this hub, all this stuff. You've just got standard stuff. It's going to really sync up very nicely. Now onto the fans themselves. You can get these from Amazon. They come in 3 packs and 5 packs, which I always find this kind of split really cheeky, because very few cases you just need 3 fans, and there's very few cases where you're going to be using 5 fans. You're either going to be using 4 or 6 or something like this. It actually is kind of a way for them to sell you a bit more without you realizing. It's very cheeky, but every fan manufacturer seems to do this. Ideal number would be 4, 3 for the front, 1 for the back, or 6, then you can fill out every spot in this case, but it is what it is. They're very good fans, so it is worth it. The RGB on these fans looks fantastic, and that's because not only do you have it diffused across the blades of the fan, you've also got rings around the edge of the fan, and the rings are on both sides of the fan as well, so it's going to look good from the inside of your case and from the outside of the case, which is something that a lot of other fans could learn from. It's really annoying when you've got a beautiful looking fan when you look at the front of your PC, but then you look from the inside of the PC and it looks kind of ugly. Luckily, you're not going to get this with these fans. So that's our parts. We've also talked a little bit about the fans. Let's put this all together in a build, and we'll reconvene at the end to share our thoughts on how it turned out.
It's cool, just lying here on the floor. Cold towels, my feet against the door. How long have I been in this space? All seem pretty cavalier. Little by little you take control. It's a little uncivil how your game's in motion. And I don't even notice that I'm playing your game. Till you leave me a warning thinking I'm the one to blame. Your words weave strings around our limbs. Players in unfamiliar skin. Dangled like toys in your roadshow. Too easy now just to let go. How did I become the puppet here? The string unraveled from my heart has made it pretty clear. Little by little you take control. It's a little uncivil how your game's in motion. And I don't even notice that I'm playing your game.
So I wasn't expecting this to be one of my favourite builds. I was kind of expecting it to be par for the course, nice RGB build, but this is actually really cool. I really love how this looks. It's got that nice RGB with the ring around the fan as well. Looks pretty cool. I actually really like the video card stand. I think it looks really nice. Everything, it looks like all this just fits perfectly into the case as well. It all just seemed to come together really nicely. Perhaps that was luck, perhaps that was skill on my part. Who knows? The FormulaMod cable's pretty good. We used one of the Motherboard 24-pin combs to comb the 3 graphics card cables together. Looks decent. Doesn't look quite as good as if you get the Shackmod's custom ones, but still looks pretty nice, and I like the theme, the red, the grey and all that. I think it looks really good in this case. When you're going for a black RGB build, it's probably best to go for dark colours. So I think if you've got a pure black build like this and you put some white custom cables in it, actually looks pretty naff. I see people go, oh, I want to have a sort of a contrasting black and white build, which is fine, but if the rest of all of your components are black, it's just going to look a little bit weird. You'll need some other pockets of white in the case to sort of match it up. Dark colours like reds, dark blues, greys, these look fantastic in black RGB builds, and this one obviously is no exception. So now that we've checked out our finished product, next thing to do is obviously to test this thing out. Why don't we start with some temperatures? So starting with Prime 95, which is a kind of a torture test for the CPU. We're going to run this for 30 minutes. It's an extreme load. It's really more of a stability test, but it will tell us about how the cooling system is going to interact with these parts. And in that, we measure a maximum temperature and also a plateau temperature or equilibrium temperature. Because in Prime 95 you get these little spikes. It goes really high, really high, really high. Whereas if we're talking about a plateau temperature, we're talking about a sustained high, okay? So that's going to be more of a realistic measure of the temperature. So the max temperature we had in Prime 95 was 72 degrees Celsius on the processor, which is fine. Obviously, you're not going to get any thermal throttling until you're hitting at least mid-80s on a CPU, so nothing to worry about here. In terms of a plateau temperature, this was 64 degrees Celsius, so this is pretty much what you're going to expect in a really heavily CPU-bound game, so that's when we're going to get your 64 degrees C. In other games, or if you're not using the CPU very much in the games, you might even get it a little bit lower, and we'll see that when we come on to the actual gaming tests later on. Now, we run our CPU and our video card temperature tests at the same time because there's no point testing them separately. If you're going to be using the system, you want to see what the stress is like, maximum stress through the system, make sure it's definitely going to work. Now, with that giant heatsink on that video card, it's no surprise that our maximum temperature was 71 degrees C. Now, that is actually fantastic. For a 3070 Ti, that is among some of the lowest temperatures that I've seen. ASUS TUF also do a really nice 3070 Ti with similar temperatures as well. There's also obviously an overclocked card straight from the factory, which makes that 71 degrees even more impressive. It's not particularly loud either, it's humming along nice and quietly. There is a BIOS switch on it, so if you wanted it to be even quieter, you can switch it from the overclocked BIOS onto the silent BIOS using the switch. As long as you do it with the PC off, you'll get even lower temperatures, but absolutely no problems there, and it gives you plenty of room for a bit of additional overclocking if that's something that you wanted. So I suppose it would be wise to actually do some gaming benchmarks, seeing as this is a gaming PC after all. Let's talk about Heaven Benchmark. This is a bit of a veteran of the benchmarking scene. It's probably been around for at least 10 years at this point. I don't actually know when it was released, but it's a great DirectX 11 benchmark, and it usually does peg that graphics card at 99%. We put it on the extreme preset. Our FPS average was 222 with a score of 5596. Now that's actually fantastic. That's a really good score. If we're talking about an RTX 3080 build, you're getting a scores usually around 6,300 to 6,400. So it is really close to the 3080. It's 10% or less really in most situations. In this benchmark, it's a little bit more of a difference, but overall very high end indeed. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a useful benchmark for us because it runs nice and quick, which means that we're not spending ages testing every PC that goes out the door here at the business. But our average FPS at 1440p resolution on the max preset is 144, which is fantastic. So if you're playing 1440p, nice high refresh rate monitor, even on the maximum settings on Tomb Raider, you're going to max out your monitor. That's absolutely fantastic. Pretty much exactly in line with what I'd expect. With our RTX 3080 builds, the 3080 and maybe like a 12700K, you might expect FPS of around 165, 170, I would probably expect. So you get slightly more by going for the 3080, but of course you're spending quite a lot more there as well. Now, something that a lot of channels don't do is test it in a real game online, which is what most people are actually going to do with their PC, but luckily for you, we're not like every other channel. We tested some Apex Legends. We put it on 1440p resolution on high settings. Not max, but high settings. The reason is max settings tend to be quite laggy, especially on esports games, and most people aren't playing esports games at max settings. They want a nice high frame rate. So we're playing at 1440p, like I said, high settings, and we're getting an FPS average of around 180, 182, which is pretty nice. So most 1440p monitor users are going to be like 144 Hz, 165 Hz. A few posh boys like me will have a 240 Hz, but for most people, this is going to be maxing out your monitor, which is absolutely fabulous. And the game looks pretty nice as well. Our temperatures are nice and cool, which is what you'd expect. It said it's a locked part. There's a bit of room here if you wanted to adjust the base clock on the 12400F. That might be actually something that's possible. Depends on the board. I haven't tried it on this one, but it might be worth doing. The clock speed that you see on the screen there goes between about 4 GHz and 4.2 GHz, which is what you expect from a 12400F. But remember, that clock that you see on the screen, that is an average. There might be some cores that are going a bit higher, some that are going a bit lower, so don't take that as the be-all and end-all. One thing you can see, of course, is that temperature on the CPU. Really nice and chilly. And with a nice cold temperature, that means that the fans are going to be running nice and quiet as well. So despite what I said earlier about perhaps the radiator performance of this fan's not being ideal, it's done the job here, especially for this locked part. Fortnite, still a popular title somehow. I mean, it's actually not that bad a game. It's okay. It's just, I thought people would have been sick of it by now. But hey, we're here to test. We're not here to pass commentary on the state of modern gaming. And speaking of gaming, this is one of those games that's going to be much more likely to be CPU bound because we're playing on 1440p, yes, but we're playing on the competitive settings. So what that means is pretty much everything is set to low, apart from the draw distance, which is on Epic. Obviously, we're not doing any scaling, so our 3D resolution is 100% as normal. CPU, obviously not the most powerful in this. Still very good CPU, but if you were to put in something like 12600K or maybe go for a Ryzen 5800X, you're probably going to get much higher results than this because you can see the GPU usage in the corner is hovering around 70%. So we're only using about 70% of this graphics card's potential, and that's because it's probably being held back by the CPU. But having said all that, we're still getting just shy of 300 FPS average, and this is on 1440p competitive settings. For instance, my monitor is a 1440p 240Hz. I don't know of any 1440p monitors that go any higher than this. So really, going for extra FPS probably isn't going to help you very much unless you're one of those super competitive scrims players, in which case you probably would want a more powerful CPU. But I think for your garden variety gamer, pretty much 99% of the guys out there, this is going to be an absolutely fantastic gaming experience for you. Red Dead Redemption 2 built-in benchmark returns for a little reprise. Sometimes we don't get to sneak this benchmark in. It's usually because of time. Sometimes actually I can't get this game to load on some systems. It's kind of weird, but we got it working this time, and the score we had at the end of it was an FPS average of 149. This is of course running 1440p resolution, maximum settings, so we can safely say that that's a very good result. Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of those games that's quite hard on the CPU and on the graphics card, particularly the graphics card, but on both really, because there's lots of sort of NPCs, lots of stuff going on around in the scenery and that kind of thing, which does use a bit of CPU as well. So it's good to know that in a nice, tough to play RPG title, which is what Red Dead Redemption is really, isn't it? You're getting fantastic performance here, and nothing to be sniffed at, certainly not. So now that we've built it, we've tested it, what do we think? What are our conclusions after this build? And I'm really happy with how this one turned out. And obviously, seems like so was the public, because as soon as I listed this one for sale, it was gone, I think within a day or two. So obviously a bit of a winner here. And I think that comes down to how nice it looks. So those EZDIY Moonlight fans, giving it a super bling appeal. Bit more RGB than your standard RGB fans. Everything tied together in this system really nicely. It's almost as if these parts were made to be put together. The space between each individual component is absolutely perfect. It's got just enough breathing room, but it still looks nice, well put together, and sort of compact in a way that is pleasing to the eye. The performance, of course, nothing to be sniffed at either. Absolutely excellent performance in all the games that we played. We've obviously talked about maybe upgrading that CPU if you're more of a high-octane esports gamer, but really that is person dependent. So thank you very much for your time, I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, you might also appreciate wherever the tile is on the screen, which is going to show you another beautiful RGB build that we've put together here on the channel. But otherwise, have a lovely day, enjoy the sunshine, and I'll see you in that next video. Goodbye.